A second conclusion of my research is that manufacturing, professional and business services, and agriculture still remain the big three in terms of output in Greater Minnesota. Manufacturing and professional and business services are in the top 1 or 2 sources of output for all of the regions in Greater Minnesota. So when you look at output and which industries create the most output across the regions, it's always manufacturing, and professional and business services are always in that top 3. That third spot varies a little bit. In 6 of the regions, agriculture remains the third largest source of output in the regions, or in that top 3. The exceptions are in the Northeast, mining is one of the top 3. In the Southeast, healthcare is one of the top 3. In the Central and North Central regions, trade, which includes retail trade and wholesale trade, are in the top 3. And then if you look at the headwaters in the East Central region, we see government coming up in the top 3. In those regions, tribal government is a big component of their regional economies, and in our model that we used for this analysis and the data we used for this analysis, tribal government is considered part of the government sector, so that may explain why the importance in those. But the key again, manufacturing is big, professional and business services are big, and agriculture still remains very large in most of our regions in Minnesota. So now that we know what our top sources of output are, let's look a little more in depth at those industries. So manufacturing is one of the major sources of output in Greater Minnesota. In 7 of the 12 regions that we studied, it is the #1 source of output for the region. So very important. Greater Minnesota as a whole lost 9,400 manufacturing jobs during the Great Recession. So it was an industry that was affected by that. It's about a 6% decline. So we know that that was not as we would have wanted. However, if we look at something called shift share analysis, which allows us to look at the drivers of that change, what we find is that Greater Minnesota actually fared better than it should have, given what was going on at the national level. So nationally, we lost jobs because the whole United States economy lost jobs, but the manufacturing industry nationally was also particularly hard hit by the Great Recession. So really, Greater Minnesota should have lost 14,000 more jobs than it did. So if we look at it that way, I think that shows that the manufacturing sector was quite competitive in Greater Minnesota. This slide highlights regions that actually added manufacturing jobs between 2003 and 2013. So while the United States, and indeed most of Greater Minnesota, actually decreased the number of jobs in that time period, these 3 regions added jobs. The West Central region has a fairly diverse manufacturing base, and many of the areas in which they are concentrated added jobs. So you see growth fairly consistently across many parts of manufacturing in that region. Growth in the Southwest, however, was driven a little bit more by changing the number of machinery manufacturing jobs, and we've seen a little bit of a cooling off in that sector since 2013. Manufacturing is diverse in Greater Minnesota. We can look down at a sector level. So if manufacturing is the industry, then the sector might be machinery manufacturing. And so we can get a little bit more of an insight into what manufacturing looks like in the different regions by looking at it that way. So if we look at what is doing very well in Greater Minnesota, we do find that food product manufacturing is predominant in Greater Minnesota. So many of the regions have that as one of their top sources of output. Other things that are large in terms of employment in Greater Minnesota include machinery manufacturing and fabricated and metal product manufacturing. Those are 2 industries which also did very well during the last 10 years and grew in the region. So we would see increases in the number of machinery manufacturing jobs and increases in the number of fabricated metal product jobs. Where we saw declines in Greater Minnesota in terms of manufacturing were in computer and electronic product manufacturing, in wood products, and in transportation equipment manufacturing. In addition to manufacturing, professional and business services is one of the big 3 in terms of output for Greater Minnesota. And this industry fared very well between 2003 and 2013. Greater Minnesota added over 27,000 new jobs in the industry, which is a 21% increase over 2003. Much of this growth was driven by the increase in the number of jobs in temporary hiring, which we discussed earlier in some of the videos. But also strong growth in terms of the percentage number was the increase in the number of jobs at the management of companies and enterprises. So these are our corporate headquarters or divisional headquarter type positions, typically very high wage. So I think this is a good sign for Greater Minnesota. Please feel free to contact me if you have any further questions or want more information. Thank you.